The Sennheiser HD560s has garnered mixed reviews. When first announced, there was some fanboy hype, followed by reviewer hype, which eventually led to, and I will say this tactfully, less than unanimous praise from customers. In the last video, I broke down Sennheiser's promises for the 560. We found that the 560 falls far short of nearly every promise. The only claim the 560 reinforces is that it has no audible distortion. Of course, the fact that the 560 is nothing like the headphone Sennheiser says does not make it a bad headphone. You simply need to know what you're getting, and Sennheiser is the last place where you will get a straight answer. In this and a few other videos, we are going to directly compare the 560s to a number of alternative headphones, not necessarily within the $200 price bracket. Here, we will begin with the HD6xx. I have already discussed the 560's build and comfort. If you want more detailed information, I suggest you watch the first video. When I compare the 560 to the 6xx, a few things immediately stand out. First, the 560 feels demonstrably cheaper in construction. Its plastic has a weird texture, and I simply cannot use words to describe it. The 6xx has thicker, more robust plastic components. The 560 has thinner and lighter plastic. Second, the cable on the 6xx is superior. It is flat and far less prone to kinks. The 6xx cable is a reasonable length. The 560, however, has a rubber-coated cable that often gets tangled. Moreover, it is ridiculously long, so long in fact that unless your source is over 5 feet away from you at all times, you will hate having to use it. Third, the 6xx has dual cable entries. This means you can get balanced connection. The 560 has a single entry, and balanced connection would require modifications. Now, I've said many times in the past what my position is about balanced connection. I'm merely going to emphasize that if you're the type that likes to run your headphones through a balanced amplifier, you can't with the 560, at least not out of the box. Comfort is a personal issue. I find that the 560 has a tight clamp out of the box. Over time, it will likely loosen. Of the two, I find that the 6xx is more comfortable. And I noticed something strange. The headband padding on the 6xx seems to be marginally thinner than on the 560. When I switched back and forth, I realized that I always felt more pressure from this 560 headband padding. Overall, it is rather strange to see that the 560 is both lighter than the HD6xx, yet has more headband padding and more clamping force. I don't really see the reason to increase padding and clamp if the headphone is lightweight. There should be no confusion. The 6xx has superior build and seems to be more comfortable than the 560. The most disappointing aspect in build, in my opinion, is the 560's egregiously cheap-feeling plastic construction. It's not as bad as sub-$50 headphones on Amazon, but it's also a far cry from the $200 headphone market. To test the 560 and 6xx, I connected them to an A/B switch. I used my RME ADI2 DAC. I played music from Amazon Music HD. I tried to volume match to the best of my ability. The 6xx is more than double the impedance of the 560, so I had to constantly alter volume when I switched back and forth. I found comfortable volume for the 560 at negative 26 decibels on the RME. For the 6xx, I achieved similar volume at negative 18 decibels. The two headphones present bass rather differently. One recreates greater sub-bass and slower transients. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, there's a sub-bass rumble from the beginning of the song. The 6xx recreated that rumble with seemingly neutral tonality. It was not accentuated and had natural decay. That is, the rumble took a few seconds to die off. The 560 also recreated the rumble, but it was noticeably faster and much less emphasized. A clear example is at the 2-minute mark into the song, where the crescendo hits. The 6xx presented the organ clearly, but also demonstrated the rolling thunder effect, making the ear cups vibrate. The 560 made the organ sound a bit more forward, and the rumble was more subdued with faster transients. In Conquer by Overwork, the 560 recreated the rolling marble sound effect at the beginning. That effect is supposed to pan left and right, but the 560 kept it dead center. On the 6XX, that same sound was a bit more obvious and retained some of the panning. The 6XX did not recreate the panning exactly, but it was closer to accurate than on the 560. There are various drums in this song. Both headphones presented these instruments. However, it seemed as if the mid-bass impact was a little harder on the 6XX. The synth was also noticeably less fatiguing on the 6XX than on the 560. In other words, the synth seemed to have more energy on the 560 than on the 6XX. I listened to several hip-hop songs including Pure Water, Reel It In, Uproar, and New Patek. Every hip-hop song I've ever heard has a sub-bass emphasis. It's not supposed to overwhelm the mix, but it is supposed to be felt. When I switched back and forth, it was obvious to me that the 560 rolls off sub-bass compared to the 6XX. The 6XX recreated the sub-bass more audibly, with slower decay than the 560. The vocals were forward in both headphones, but on the 560 it appeared that the sparkle in the vocals was marginally elevated. Indeed, it seemed that the 6XX had a more natural position of the vocals. On the 560, the vocals remained 2 steps ahead of the mix, and on the 6XX, I'd say that the vocals were just about 1 step ahead of the mix. I listened to Bim Bam Smash from the Bourne Supremacy soundtrack. At 1 minute and 10 seconds, there is a large drum impact reminiscent of 2 cars smashing into each other. On the 6XX, that drum impact was hard-hitting and created reverberation in the ear cups. That reverberation lingered a few seconds as the other instruments ramped up. On the 560, that impact was much more subdued and did not create the reverberation as I heard it on the 6XX. Indeed, the reverberation became noticeable only after I increased volume beyond what I had matched to the 6XX. Nevertheless, irrespective of the volume, the 560 did not create the drum like the 6XX. Overall, bass transients is significantly faster on the 560. There is a noticeable sub-bass roll-off as well. This roll-off is quite apparent in hip-hop tracks. Both the 6XX and 560 meld sub-bass and mid-bass, and both meld bass into mids. However, it appears that the 560 is marginally clearer in the bass region than the 6XX. I attribute this to the faster transients and less than accurate sub-bass reproduction. The short story is this. It won't take much effort to realize that the 6XX has a different bass response from the 560. Mids are also noticeably different between these headphones. Depending on your hearing and music, you may either like the 560's more forward vocal presentation or you will hate it. In Why Am I Like This by Orla Gartland, the track has natural grain and sibilance. Both headphones represented both of these details. It appeared that the grain was very similar between the two headphones, and if I had to choose, I would say that the 6XX was slightly smoother. Sibilance, however, was aggressive on the 560 in comparison. The 560 noticeably emphasized this sibilance, whereas the 6XX kept it neutral. The timbre of instruments sounded the same on both headphones, however, the decay was faster on the 560. The 6XX had a bit more melding among instruments compared to the 560. However, this resulted in a more full tonality as well. In Want It Back by Haim, the sibilance issue resurfaced. The 6XX did not boost the primary vocalist sibilance, and the 560 did. The backup vocalist appeared vastly different on each headphone. On the 560, the backup vocalist sounded more sibilant and more distant with thinner voices. On the 6XX, the backup vocalist had fuller tonalities and appeared a bit closer. On the 560, the two backup vocalists were easier to hear when the instruments played at maximum. On the 6XX, the backup vocalists tended to meld into one. The differences were not night and day, but evident upon close inspection. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the 6XX recreated the drums and bass with accuracy. They were clearly audible and their transients seemed natural. On the 560, the bass and drums appeared to be less emphasized and their transients was noticeably faster. The ukulele and guitar had the same tonalities on each headphone, but the decay was faster on the 560. Timbre of all the instruments was, I would think, about the same. The male vocalist has a bit of sibilance, which the 560 did not push forward as much as it had on the female vocals. In comparison to the 6XX, the 560 seemed to present a bit more energy in the sibilance, however. There are sharp intakes of breaths between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds in this song. Neither headphone made those breaths sound sharp, more like gasps. Regardless, the gasps were slightly easier to hear on the 560 than on the 6XX, and I mean marginally. Overall, the meze response is pretty different. Both headphones present vocal forward sound, but the 560 makes vocals appear to be more forward than the 6XX. The accentuated sibilance combined with the fast transients results in a vastly different mid sound signature. To use audiophile parlance, it is abundantly clear that the 6XX has thicker, more analog, more natural mids. The 560, again using audiophile lingo, has thinner, airier, more forward mids in comparison. Treble response is different between these headphones. The 560 has more energy and marginally clearer detail. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the 560 rendered the brass and horns with more emphasis than the 6XX. On the 6XX, these instruments were clear, though they seemed a bit blunted in comparison. At higher volumes, the 6XX was much easier to listen to, but I think that the 560 was more accurate. The timpani, and it should be no surprise, was more true on the 6XX than on the 560. Instruments tended to meld more obviously on the 6XX due to the longer decay. In Flight from the City by Johan Johansson, the 560 made the piano sound as if it was about 8 to 10 feet away from me. On the 6XX, piano seemed closer, maybe within, say, 6 feet. The transients of each note was noticeably faster on the 560. Melding occurred more often on the 6XX. The bassier notes were more apparent on the 6XX. The cello sounded a bit smoother on the 6XX, but was more accurate on the 560. In both headphones, I could hear the creaking of wood of the pianist's bench, the shifting of the cello, and the electric buzz. Each detail was marginally clearer on the 560. In Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, both headphones properly represented where the instruments were, the piano in the right ear cup, the drum kit in the left, the saxophone dead center, and the bass somewhere in the mix. However, the 6XX had more bass presence. The saxophone was a little smoother on the 6XX, and the 560 appeared to provide the correct amount of energy to it. There was more melding among instruments on the 6XX. All instruments had accurate timbre on both headphones, but the 560 rendered noticeably faster decay. Overall, I think treble is more neutral on the 560. The 6XX has a smoother presentation, taking instruments that might be a little harsh and rounding off a slight bit of emphasis. Details are slightly clearer on the 560, and I want to underline this not by a significant amount. Instruments tend to meld more on the 6XX, partly because of the longer decay. If you were to ask me which headphone has more neutral tonality for treble, I would say it was the 560. But if you were to ask me which one is easier to listen to and has a fuller presentation, well, then it has to be the 6XX. I have tried to explain what details I hear throughout this test. I will merely summarize my findings. Neither headphone presents details particularly well. Obvious details remain obvious, but subtle details are either totally lost or very difficult to perceive. The 560's faster transients sometimes result in details appearing more clearly than on the 6XX, but this was highly dependent on the track. Moreover, even when some details were a little clearer on the 560, the 560 still did not present more details than the 6XX. Indeed, there were some occasions where a detail was inaudible on the 560 even though it was audible on the 6XX. For example, at the beginning of Flight from the City, there is an electric buzz sound. The 6XX recreated that sound, but I struggled to hear it on the 560. Later in the song, that effect returns, and I heard it on both headphones, though it was a little bit more obvious on the 6XX. It is safe to say that the 6XX and 560 will not be satisfactory for anyone who likes detailed retrieval. Both headphones do a competent job, but they are nothing special in this regard. If a detail is meant to be blatantly obvious, the 560 and 6XX will render it. If a detail is layered, you may or may not hear it. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including the sound of wind, rustling of grass, children playing, synth, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The king of detail retrieval in this test is the Focal Clear, which presents 18 footsteps. The second best is the Austrian Audio Hi-X55, which presents 14 to 15 footsteps. The 6XX presented 6 to 7 footsteps. The 560 presented 5 to 6 footsteps. The footsteps were marginally clearer on the 560, but weirdly enough, I did not hear more of them. Assuming there is some variation due to improper volume matching, it is still disappointing to see that the 560 does not trounce the 6XX in detail retrieval, despite Sennheiser's flamboyant claims. There is a noticeable but not huge difference in Soundstage. The 6XX has the same soundstage as on the LCD1 and the HD6xx. The 560 has slightly wider soundstage, though I would say less than that of the hifi Mansandara. The faster decay and bass roll-off creates more air in the 560's signature. I think this contributes to the 560 sounding wider than the 6XX. Regardless, the 560 is above average in this regard. It is apparent that the 560S and 6XX share a sound signature. They're both vocal forward, but that is really all they have in common. The 560 has a bass roll-off, unnaturally fast decay, sibilance, spike, but neutral treble. The 6XX has neutral bass, natural decay, no sibilance, and a slightly rolled-off treble. I'm sure people will disagree, but I don't think either headphone is actually neutral. The 6XX has what a lot of users would say natural mids. I think that's correct. Natural, as in voices sound full and forward, instruments meld and have reverberation, and there's no fatiguing emphasis anywhere in the frequency spectrum. When you switch to the 560, things change pretty quickly. If you don't mind a sub-bass roll-off, then the bass is faster and a little clearer than on the 6XX. However, if you are sensitive to sibilance, the 560 will be a deal breaker. Both male and female sibilance is obvious, but female vocals suffer the greatest. There is a spike somewhere between 5 kHz and 9 kHz, and this is incredibly annoying. I was not able to find a single track that sounded the same on both headphones. Indeed, the 6XX always presented a more robust, more powerful bass, thicker mids, and overall more natural sound signature. Maybe this is why Sennheiser says the 560 is analytical. Check their marketing, they use that descriptor. Well, I suppose if you compare to the 6XX, then the 560 might at first blush seem more analytical. The greater air, faster transients in the signature results in marginally greater instrument and vocal separation and marginally clearer detail. But I hardly think this is truly analytical. If you ask my opinion, it seems like Sennheiser took the 6XX sound and watered it down. You get less bass, thinner mids, and faster transients. Yes, in return you do get some more soundstage and clarity, but I think the cost-benefit analysis is not remotely satisfactory. I bashed Sennheiser's marketing in the first 560 video. I meant every word of what I said. Sennheiser should be ashamed for what they say, and it is too bad they cannot be sued for their deceit. Sennheiser's misleading practices aside, can I say that the 560 is a decent headphone? Yes, of course. The headphone suffers from a few key issues, namely sibilance and build. The other aspects that I mentioned, the sub-bass roll-off, the transients, the vocal forward nature, is merely a sound signature that you may or may not like. This brings us to value. Sennheiser has not really produced anything groundbreaking. There is nothing whatsoever I can point to which justifies the $200 price tag. Yeah, the headphone has a different sound signature from the 6XX, but look at the price from the 6XX. It is $220 currently. For $20 more, you get better build, a better cable, better comfort, and a sound signature that, at least in my opinion, seems to hit the sweet spot for a lot of people. I read in some forums that people hoped the 560 would be a cheaper HD650. I don't understand this. There already is a cheaper 650. It's the 6XX. I know Drop fluctuates their prices, and assuming the 6XX stays at $220, then I don't see why anyone would ever hope that the 560 is a cheaper 650. Anyway, the point is this. Those who had this hope are not going to get their wish. The 560 is vastly different. Whether you like the 560 or the 6XX sound signature is a personal preference. I think there's one specific factor you should think about if you are thinking of buying either the 560 or the 6XX. And this has nothing to do with the bass roll-off or the build. Instead, it is that sibilance spike. Along with it, you get an area presentation which, depending on your music and source, may sound exceedingly fatiguing or even harsh. That, more than anything else, is a make it or break it proposition, I think. To me, $200 seems unacceptable for the 560. I take the grand view. The build is substandard in this price bracket. The accessories are substandard and truthfully non-existent. The comfort is not quite agreeable, and the sibilance spike is quite fatiguing. I cannot justify the price tag. Maybe you can.